Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing a review of An Artificial Night by Seanan McGuire, the third book in the October Daye series. This is a series that I am doing a huge reread of this year, and obviously I am now through book 3 and things are starting to get interesting. But for anybody who has not seen one of my October Daye reviews, I break them up into 3 parts. The first part is a non-spoilery kind of review section. So if you've never read this book, you are fine to stick around through that. After that, my next section is a spoilery discussion of my thoughts for this book. So if you do not want to be spoiled for this book, obviously you would want to leave prior to that particular section. And then lastly, the last section is all of my thoughts that are spoilery for the entire series, because I have reread this. So now I'm like picking up on things that I'm like, oh, I didn't even notice that. And that's so cool because it relates to, this book way down the line. So you can choose when to leave this book or when to leave this video based off of how much of this book you have actually read. But let's go ahead and get into it. This book is obviously about October Daye, who is a half fae, half human changeling knight. And so she often gets called up and asked to solve these big problems that nobody else can kind of solve. And in this book, there are kids that have gone missing and she is asked to track them down. And she figures out very quickly that a firstborn fae has taken them and it is part of his right. And of course, Toby looks at that and says, "That's lovely, give me my kids back." And so that is the big storyline for this particular book. So let's jump right into the review part of it and talk about the world building. Now, the world building of this series in general ends up being phenomenal because we just keep getting more and more, and it feels very much like a real world. The first book of this series was very info dump because we had to lay the foundation. There was so much information that we needed that it just was almost jarring, like when we had to talk about the world building. In the second book, it felt better, but I realized since filming my review of the second one, it felt better because we didn't have to do quite so much world building in that one because we just didn't need it. But this one, we go back to actually needing a lot more world building because we're talking about firstborn fae, and we really haven't, we've mentioned in passing in the first 2 books what firstborn fae are and all that kind of stuff, but we didn't really talk any in depth about them. And so we needed to lay that down. And I thought in this particular book, Seanan McGuire did a much better job of giving us that information in a way that felt a little bit more natural. We knew what she was doing as Toby was asking her questions like, how do I kill a firstborn fae or whatever. Like, I don't even remember the questions that she asked, but it was like as she was asking her questions, we knew that it was partially because Toby didn't know, but also partially because we as the audience didn't know, and this is how Seanan McGuire was getting that information to us, but it didn't feel awful, right? It felt like a natural progression of the story rather than like pulling us out of the story to give us this information, which is really what happened in the first book. So yay, the world building, what the information itself was really interesting, and the way that it was given to us was a lot better than we have had in the past. So after that, let's talk about characters and character development. Oh goodness. So we see a lot of the characters that we have seen before, but it's often in passing. So for example, Danny, our taxi driver, we see him at the beginning and we see him kind of in passing later, but we don't spend almost any time with him. Or, all of these side characters that have appeared in the first 2 books, we see them, but we really don't spend much time with them. And that's because this is really about Toby and what she kind of needs to do. That being said, we really didn't get a ton of development from Toby. It just wasn't that kind of story. This was really a story about Toby finally accepting who she is I mean, throughout this entire book, basically everybody is like, this is who you are. And Toby's like, no, I'm not that person. And then everybody keeps saying, but no, really, you are. And finally, at the end of the book, she says, yes, okay, I am. And that was her big development. And that's really all we got. Now, it is a big thing, and it does change the trajectory of this series. It changes how she handles things in the future. But it's like, that was the big development for this. The only other character development we got was for Quentin. And again, it was at the end of the story. And it's essentially that he has to make a choice, and it is a really bad choice with no good answers. And there are huge repercussions for him for that choice. And so we will see those, how he handles those repercussions going forward. So that is a big thing. But it wasn't really like there was development in this story. It's just that we got the big events that are going to cause character growth for the next book, which I did not love. Although there was an introduction of one character who I do love, and that is May. And we see her in the beginning of this book, and I really like May. So I was really happy to see that. But next, let's talk about the storyline itself. The storyline itself was actually solid. It is about kidnapped children. So like, content warning for kidnapped children, and also content warning for some body horror, magical transformations with non-consensual kind of thing. That's actually kind of rough. Although, if you're bothered by that, I will say that the majority of it is over, like where we don't have much after the middle of the book. We still have it. It's just not as heavily emphasized as the first half. That being said, anyway, the plot line itself is actually really solid. It's really interesting. Setting yourself up in opposition to a firstborn fae never goes well for anybody. So it's really interesting to see how Toby deals with it and how everybody else reacts to her decision to kind of go after this firstborn fae. That being said, I got to the end of this book and I felt like, yes, the storyline itself was good. However, it almost didn't matter, because clearly this book was about Toby accepting this information about herself that everybody is telling her. That was the point of this book. And so the storyline almost did not matter. It did matter in the sense that it set up Toby being able to accept this information. It set up the choice that Quentin needs to make. It gave us some very interesting information about Firstborn. It gave us a lot of hints as to things that we learn later in the story, or in the series. However, it felt like the storyline was designed to do those things rather than having a storyline that was independent and then just happened to do those things, if that makes sense. And so it felt almost like a square peg in a circle hole, right? And so I thought that the storyline was good, but it almost did not matter. And then just really quickly, I thought that the writing itself was much better. Again, it's interesting to watch the progression of Seanan McGuire as a writer, and getting her to the point of where we know her to be now, which is just a stellar writer. So the sentences themselves flow more smoothly. It's just a nicer read. But overall, I did think that this was an interesting book. I thought it was a solid book, but it is not my favorite in the series. And honestly, I think it could have probably been done better. Would I still recommend it? Yes, I think that this is a good series. Like I said, this is not the strongest entry in this particular series. But that is it for my non-spoilery review. So if you do not want to be spoiled for this book, this is your cue to go ahead and click away from this video. Okay, you guys, so let's talk about some of my very spoilery thoughts for this book. I'm just going to go ahead and go in order as I wrote them down in my journal. And the very first thing that I noticed was when Toby went to Stacy and Mitch's house to kind of just look around the kids' room, and she took her rose goblin Spike with her, and Spike was losing it at the scent because he knew it was Blind Michael. And I kind of always got that was why he was losing it. But I always thought it was because Blind Michael is just a threat to Fairy in general. But this time around, I finally realized probably not, that it's because Spike is Luna's Rose Goblin. And so Blind Michael poses a threat to Luna specifically, and that's why he was losing it. And I was just like, oh, didn't catch that the first dozen times I reread this book, but I'm glad I caught it now. It was very cool. I was very excited to see that. And I also thought it was really interesting to kind of watch Tybalt and Toby, because Tybalt has been searching for some answers to some questions that he has about Toby. And in the beginning of the book, he says, I don't have my answers yet. But then as he's interacting with Toby, he realizes, and we realize with him, that she does not know that she is accidentally lying to him. And so we get to watch his transformation. And I thought that was really cool. And then later on at the end of the book, where he says, I do have my answers, and I know you were not intentionally lying to me. I thought that was really interesting, and I thought it was really funny that Toby's like, okay, tell me. And Tybalt just said, no, you're not going to accept this information from me. You have to learn it on your own. And of course, at the moment, I was thinking, what a jerk move, Tybalt. But at the same time, I recognize, yeah, okay, that's probably the right way to deal with Toby on this. But I thought that was a really interesting thing to see. And then there's a number of moments in this book that made me kind of want to cry. And I swear to you, every time Toby asks the Lushak for help, it hurts, because even now, the Lushak is clearly regretting her words that she is going to kill Toby, because it's going to happen, because she only speaks the truth. And so when they talk about that, as Toby is asking for this favor, it's you can see that the Lushak regrets this, and it's just it hurts so bad for me to read this. But yeah, and then the funny thing is that, so Toby asked for the Lushak for this favor to get her into Blind Michael's lands. I completely forgot that the Lushak turns her into a kid. I was like, how did I even forget this? And it was just like, Mom, I don't know, but I did. So as I was sitting here, I was just like, what? Oh yeah, she's a kid. I forgot. And I just thought that was really interesting that I had forgotten it. And then, of course, there was another scene that just hurt so bad, and that was watching Toby have to decide to leave these kids behind. These kids being transformed into horses. She had to leave them behind because she had not bargained for them. She did not have a way to get them out without endangering everyone. She could not guarantee the safety of the kids that she had already helped if she decided to try to help these other human kids. And watching her make that choice was just so hard. I also forgot that this is the story where Tybalt gives up one of his lives for Toby. I did not remember that. I thought it was a little bit later in this series, but I thought it was interesting that it happened now. And then I really loved this scene where we're at, they're reciting the Ballad of Tamlin, and we're breaking Blind Michael's ride, and everybody who identifies themselves as being there to help save Toby. And I was just like, yay! Toby has family. She maybe doesn't recognize them as such, but Toby has family. These are people who are risking so much by coming out and trying to save her. And I loved it so much. And then, of course, afterwards, the Lushak knowing that Toby was going to go back to Blind Michael's lands to try to kill him. I love the relationship between the Lushak and Toby, because it's very clear that the Lushak has been around the block, right? She's ancient, years old. And so she understands Toby. She understands what Toby is going to do. And they may argue about it, but the Lushak is never surprised. And honestly, even the arguments are only half-hearted. And I really love that they can have that kind of relationship where Toby really just gets to be herself. Just absolutely adore that. And then, of course, Quentin's impossible choice at the end was also heartbreaking. And the way that he shut down after that, where he withdrew from the human world, he's more or less withdrawing from fairy. But I love the fact that because he was withdrawing from the human world and the fairy world, he's chosen Toby as his safe haven. And I think that that speaks volume to their relationship as well. So while I did not like the choice, I liked him, watching him choose her as his safe haven. And that's it, guys. Those are my spoilery thoughts for this book. We're going to jump into the spoilery for the entire series section. So if you've not read the entire series and you do not want to be spoiled, this is your cue to click away from this video. Okay, so I don't have a ton of spoilery thoughts about this, spoilery for the series thoughts about this book. Most of them fall into two categories: Tybalt and Toby's heritage. So let's talk about Tybalt. I had mentioned that I did not remember that Tybalt gave up a life for Toby this early on in the book. I did not realize how ride or die Tybalt was from the beginning. Goodness gracious. I mean, he came after her in book 2, A Local Habitation. He went to Fremont and was there for her. He literally gave up a life in this book. I mean, just like so ride or die for her. And it was so interesting to see it. And then, what was the other one? The other ones were about Toby's heritage. And so obviously we're going to learn more about Toby's heritage in the next book. So a lot of these hints kind of were bigger, more obvious hints, but it was just like Toby explaining that Oberon doesn't claim most of his descendants, and anybody he does claim tend to be heroes. And I remember I wrote that down in my journal, and I was like, foreshadowing. And then like almost immediately, Toby gets to the Lushak's house and the Lushak literally calls her Child of Oberon. And I was just like, yep, foreshadowing. That's exactly what that is. And then, of course, Toby, sitting here in her own ignorance, is just like, but I'm not a child of Oberon. It's like, oh, just you wait, darling. You will absolutely know. And then, of course, the other big kind of hit you over the head hint that we got was when Toby was looking for the stable for the human kids that are being turned into horses, she smelled the blood far before Quentin ever did, and she followed the blood trail, and again he had no idea. And so we get that hint that her ability to detect blood is not on par with what you would expect from a changeling Dunya Shay, because she is better at it than even a pureblood. So, and then the last little bit about her heritage that we got that I absolutely loved was that when we're breaking Blind Michael's ride, they're reciting Tamlin, and Toby makes the remark that she recognizes it as a recitation, or that Amandine used to sing it to her as a lullaby. Now, when I first read this book the many times, I just kind of was like, that's a weird lullaby, but whatever. And then on the most recent book, we found out that Janet, the subject of the Tamlin ballad, or one of the subjects, is Toby's grandmother. Like, it is Amandine's mom. And so, of course, Amandine chose a lullaby that is the ballad that is about her mother. Oh my goodness. And so it was so cool to see this clue that we were given in book 3 about information we aren't even fully given until book like 13. It was just, I sat there and I had to pause for a moment and be like, oh my gosh, that's so awesome. So yes, I was totally geeking out at that moment. And then I do remember the other thing I wanted to say about Tybalt, and that is, I thought it was very interesting that, again, when Tybalt was announcing himself to Blind Michael when they were breaking Blind Michael's ride, he says, "My claim precedes yours." And like, we know that Blind Michael is doing this ride in part so that once Toby finishes it, she will be his bride. He is claiming her as his bride. And I'm like, Tybalt, you're claiming Toby like that? Yay! You will definitely do that in the future, but I didn't realize you had done it again. I didn't realize he had done this so early on in the series, so it was very cool to see. But that's it. That's all my thoughts about this book. I love this series. This is not my favorite book, but there was so much in it that I thought was so interesting and really gives us insight into character relationships and where this story is going. So it was still a very much enjoyable read, and I am looking forward to the next one. But if you've read this series, please let me know down below. Come talk to me about it. I love geeking out about this series. But that is all I have, you guys. So until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.